June 14, 1944. Rechlin Air Base, Germany. $800 hours. Oberingenieur Klaus Hartmann, 42, Chief Propulsion Analyst for the Luftwaffe High Command, stood before a disassembled Packard Merlin V-1650 engine. The engine had been pulled from a captured North American P-51 Mustang, serial number 43-24825, shot down over Cambrai, France, 8 days earlier. Hartmann's team had spent 72 hours stripping the engine to its component parts. Every gear, every valve, every inch of the supercharger system lay catalogued on the hangar floor. The room was silent except for the scratch of pencils on paper. Hartmann looked at the two-stage, two-speed supercharger assembly. Then he looked at the specifications for Germany's Daimler-Benz DB601 engine. His 33-liter displacement versus the Merlin's 27 liters. By displacement alone, German engines should have dominated. They didn't. What Hartmann wrote in his report that afternoon would travel directly to Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring's desk. The conclusion was stark. In supercharger technology, we are 2 years behind. That admission changed nothing. By then, it was already too late. Spring 1944. The air war over Europe had reached its decisive phase. Allied heavy bombers, B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, flew from England deep into Germany daily. For 2 years they had suffered devastating losses. October 1943 saw the worst. 9% of American bombers attacking their targets failed to return. Another 46% came home damaged. The problem was simple. German Messerschmitt, Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s dominated above 20,000 feet. American escort fighters, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt and Lockheed P-38 Lightning, either lacked range or altitude performance. Bomber crews flew unprotected for hundreds of miles. Then in December 1943, something appeared in German skies that shouldn't have been possible. Single-engine fighters with range exceeding 800 miles. Performance above 30,000 feet matching Germany's best. 6 50-caliber machine guns. The North American P-51 Mustang, powered by the Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. German pilots reported the encounters with confusion. A single-engine fighter escorting bombers to Berlin and back? Aviation doctrine said impossible. The fuel capacity alone would require tanks larger than the aircraft. But the reports kept coming. By February 1944, Mustangs were everywhere. Bomber loss rates dropped from 9% to 3.5%. Germany's carefully rebuilt fighter force, trained to intercept unescorted bombers, suddenly faced escorts that could outfight them at their own altitudes. Luftwaffe High Command needed answers. When P-51 number 43-24825 crash-landed near Cambrai on June 6, 1944, the Berge Bataillon salvage units had the aircraft at Rechlin within 48 hours. The test directive was explicit. Determine why this engine performs at altitude while ours do not. Hartmann knew the answer before he started. He just needed to prove it. Rechlin was Germany's equivalent to America's Wright Field. Every captured Allied aircraft ended up here eventually. The facility had tested Spitfires, P-47 Thunderbolts, even a few B-17 bombers, but the P-51 was different. Hartmann assembled his team in Hangar 7. 6 engineers, 3 master mechanics, 2 metallurgists, all veterans of German aero engine development. Most had worked on the DB601 and DB605 programs. "Gentlemen," Hartmann said, "this is a Packard V-1650 American-built copy of the British Rolls-Royce Merlin. Displacement, 27 liters versus our 34. Yet at 25,000 feet it produces more power than our DB601E. One of the younger engineers spoke up. "Impossible, Oberingenieur. We have 40% more displacement. Precisely why we're here." The teardown began methodically. Cowling removed. Accessories disconnected. Propeller reduction gear disassembled. Each piece photographed, measured, weighed. 3 hours in, they reached the supercharger. Hartmann stopped. "There," he said, pointing. The Merlin supercharger system occupied the entire right side of the engine, 2 impellers, one behind the other. Between them, an intercooler radiator, a complex gear train with multiple ratios, automatic boost control linked to the throttle. 2 stages, one mechanic whispered. We knew they had 2 stages, but seeing it changes things, Hartmann finished. German engines used single-stage superchargers with variable hydraulic drive, efficient at low altitude, adequate up to 15,000 feet. Beyond that, they struggled. The DB605's hydraulic system helped, but couldn't compensate for fundamental limitations. The Merlin's approach was different. The first stage compressed air to intermediate pressure. The intercooler cooled it. The second stage compressed it again. The result? Sustained boost pressure up to 30,000 feet. Hartmann did the calculations on a chalkboard. Power at sea level, roughly equal. Power at 10,000 feet. Germans ahead slightly. Power at 25,000 feet. Merlin superior by 200 horsepower. Power at 30,000 feet. Merlin dominant. How much does this system weigh? One engineer asked. The metallurgist consulted his notes. Supercharger assembly, intercooler, ducting, controls. Approximately 120 kilograms more than our single-stage system. They built the entire aircraft around high-altitude capability, Hartmann said. We built engines around displacement and torque. The investigation continued for 3 more days. Every component measured, every design choice analyzed. Hartmann's team found the Merlin to be mechanically complex. It had over 14,000 individual parts versus the DB605's estimated 10,000. American and British engineers had sacrificed simplicity for performance. But the performance was undeniable. On June 17th, test pilot Hauptmann Theodor Rosarius flew the captured P-51B. His unit, officially designated Zwei-Pontren-Versuchsverband Oberkommando der Luftwaffe, but known as the Circus Rosarius, specialized in flying captured Allied aircraft. Rosarius had flown Bf-109s for years. He knew German fighters intimately. His post-flight report was matter of fact. Superior high-altitude performance confirmed. Rate of climb excellent above 7,000 meters. Speed at 9,000 meters, 680 kilometers per hour, sustained. Our Bf-109G6 achieved 630 at best. Briefly, he added a personal observation. At combat altitudes, this aircraft is not just competitive. It is superior. The report went up the chain. Rechlin to Luftwaffe High Command to Göring's desk. 2 pages of technical analysis. 1 paragraph of strategic implications. The enemy has fielded a long-range escort fighter superior to our interceptors at combat altitudes. Supercharger technology provides decisive advantage. Recommendation: expedite DB603 2-stage development. Timeline: 18 months minimum. 18 months. It was July 1944. The war would be over in 10. The Merlin engine represented more than engineering excellence. It represented a fundamental difference in design philosophy. German aero engines prioritized displacement and reliability. Larger engines running at lower speeds lasted longer. The DB605 ran at 2,700 RPM maximum. Robust, maintainable, but limited in power-to-weight ratio. British and American engines took the opposite approach. Smaller displacement, higher speeds, more complex systems. The Merlin ran at 3,000 RPM. It required more maintenance, but it produced more power per kilogram. Neither approach was wrong. They reflected different strategic priorities. Germany needed engines that could be maintained by young, inexperienced mechanics with limited tool access at forward airfields. Reliability mattered more than maximum performance. The DB605 delivered Britain and America had rear area maintenance facilities with trained technicians and full equipment. They could afford complex engines if those engines won air battles. The Merlin delivered that. The 2-stage supercharger made the difference at altitude, but it required more than just adding a second compressor stage. The intercooler system cooled compressed air between stages. Cooler air is denser air. Denser air means more oxygen per cubic meter. More oxygen means more power, but intercoolers added weight, complexity, and cooling system load. The automatic boost control maintained optimal supercharger speed across the altitude range. German engines used manual controls. Pilots had to manage boost pressure themselves. Under combat stress, that was another task competing for attention. The Packard V-1650 produced roughly 1,400 horsepower at 25,000 feet, with war emergency power. The DB-605A produced about 1,150 horsepower at the same altitude. 250 horsepower difference. At those altitudes, that difference was decisive. German engineers knew how to build two-stage superchargers. The technology wasn't secret, but implementing it required retooling factories, retraining workers, and accepting delays in current production. In 1942, that might have been possible. By mid-1944, Germany couldn't afford the disruption. The DB-603, a larger engine with provisions for two-stage supercharging, entered limited production in 1944. Too late. Too few. Most went to reconnaissance aircraft and night fighters, not day fighters. Adolf Galland, General der Jagdflieger, wrote after the war, "We knew the capabilities of the Mustang. We had captured specimens. We had test data. What we lacked was time." The strategic impact was immediate and catastrophic. Between January and April 1944, the Luftwaffe lost over 1,000 fighter pilots. Not just pilots, but experienced pilots. 28 aces with more than 30 kills. 8 with more than 100. The Mustang didn't just escort bombers. It hunted German fighters, aggressively, above German airfields, during takeoff and landing when fighters were most vulnerable. On March 6, 1944, over 800 American bombers attacked Berlin. Over 900 fighters escorted them. Most were P-51Bs. German interceptors shot down 69 bombers, but lost 160 fighters. The exchange rate had reversed. By May 1944, Luftwaffe day fighter operations over Germany had become defensive desperation. Every sortie was a calculated risk. Fuel shortages meant less training for new pilots. Less training meant more losses. More losses meant fewer experienced pilots to train replacements. The technical advantage of the Merlin engine had created a strategic death spiral. Klaus Hartmann never saw his report's impact. He remained at Rechlin through late 1944, analyzing captured aircraft that arrived in decreasing numbers as Allied air superiority became absolute. In January 1945, Soviet forces approached from the east. Rechlin evacuated. Most records were destroyed or lost. Hartmann disappeared into the chaos of Germany's collapse. Post-war, former Luftwaffe engineer Heinrich Müller found work at Technical University of Munich. In his 1977 memoir, he reflected on the engine analysis. The Merlin's two-stage supercharger was not magic. It was engineering. Methodical, excellent engineering. We could have built equivalent systems. The question was never could we, but would we? And when? By the time we answered those questions honestly, the war was decided. Walter Wolfram, a Luftwaffe fighter ace, was one of the few German pilots who flew captured P-51s as part of training demonstrations. He recalled, "During the war, I had the opportunity to fly captured P-47s and P-51s. I didn't like the Thunderbolt. It was too big. The cockpit was immense and unfamiliar. The P-51 was different. A fine airplane, but disconcerting. All those levers, controls, and switches. We had nothing like this in the 109. Everything was simple and very close to the pilot. You fitted into the cockpit like a hand in a glove. How their pilots managed all those controls and still fought effectively amazed me." His comment revealed something important. German pilots valued simplicity. American pilots accepted complexity for capability. Both perspectives were valid. The difference was that complexity, when it worked, won fights. Wolfram survived the war with 174 victories, all on the Eastern Front. He became a businessman in post-war Germany. In interviews decades later, he spoke respectfully of the P-51. "It wasn't just the engine," he said. "It was the entire system. Long range, high performance, good weapons, good visibility. They designed everything around one mission: escort bombers to target and back. They succeeded. Clarence Bud Anderson, American P-51 pilot, flew 116 combat missions between November 1943 and January 1945. 16 aerial victories. He called the Merlin engine's characteristics decisive. The Merlin had great gobs of power and was equally at home high or low, thanks to its two-stage, two-speed supercharger. Anderson flew a P-51D named Old Crow. On May 27, 1944, at 30,000 feet, his flight of 4 was attacked by 4 Bf-109G6s from above. The German tactic was classic: dive attack from altitude. Use speed for escape. Anderson's flight broke the attack, maneuvered, and shot down 3 of the 4 attackers. In the hands of a good pilot, Anderson later wrote, the Mustang could certainly hold its own. That was characteristic American understatement. The Mustang didn't just hold its own. From late 1943 to May 1945, P-51s destroyed nearly 5,000 German aircraft in air combat, more than any other American fighter. The human cost on both sides was severe. 66 Tuskegee airmen died in combat. Hundreds more American pilots across all units flying Mustangs didn't return. On the German side, the loss of experienced fighter pilots proved irreplaceable. Young replacements, poorly trained due to fuel shortages, faced veteran American pilots in superior aircraft. Unteroffizier Kurt Scherer, a pilot with Thesa Taurus JG-4, recalled a demonstration by the Circus Rosarius in mid-1944. The day was rounded off with a demonstration of captured American aircraft, in particular a P-51 Mustang. It was stressed that our Bf-109s and FW-190s were generally superior to this type. We soon realized, on our first combat sortie, that this statement was not entirely accurate. That careful understatement masked bitter reality. By late 1944, German pilots knew they were outmatched. They flew anyway. Duty demanded it. Today, the Merlin engine is studied in engineering schools worldwide, not as history but as case study in design optimization. There's a principle taught: performance at the point of need is worth complexity everywhere else. The Merlin was complex, 14,000 parts, demanding maintenance, sensitive to fuel quality, but at 25,000 feet over Germany, it delivered the performance needed to win. The German approach, prioritizing simplicity and reliability, had merit. In different circumstances, it might have been superior. But air superiority in 1944-1945 Europe required high-altitude performance. The side that delivered it won. The technical lesson extends beyond engines. Throughout history, conflicts are decided by whoever optimizes for the actual battlefield conditions, not the preferred conditions. Germany designed engines for reliability at forward bases. Britain and America designed engines for performance in air combat. The war was decided in air combat. There's a deeper story in Klaus Hartmann's June 1944 report. He didn't write, "We failed." He wrote, "We are 2 years behind." The distinction matters. German engineers weren't incompetent. They were constrained by different priorities, different resources, different strategic choices made years earlier. By mid-1944, those choices had compounded into insurmountable disadvantage. The Packard Motor Car Company, a civilian automobile manufacturer, produced over 55,000 Merlin engines during the war. Quality control, despite skepticism from British engineers initially, proved excellent. American mass production methods applied to complex engines worked. The symbolic moment came in December 1943. First P-51Bs arrived at 8th Air Force bases in England. Within weeks, they flew escort missions to targets that had been considered unreachable. On March 4, 1944, a P-51 pilot saw Bf-109s over Berlin for the first time at altitude. The German fighters defending their capital were struggling at 28,000 feet. The Mustangs were not. Hermann Göring supposedly said, upon hearing Mustangs had appeared over Berlin. "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." Whether he actually said those words is debated, but the sentiment captured reality. The appearance of long-range, high-altitude escorts over German cities meant bomber formations could operate with acceptable losses. Strategic bombing could continue. The war would be won from the air and ground together. The Merlin engine sits at the center of that story. Not because it was perfect. It wasn't. But because it was optimized for the mission that mattered most at the moment that mattered most. Engineers worldwide still reference its design. The two-stage supercharger configuration influenced post-war development. Jet engines eventually made the entire discussion obsolete, but the principles remained. Several Merlin-powered aircraft still fly today. Collectors maintain them at enormous expense. When a P-51 performs at an air show, the distinctive sound of the Merlin at full power is unforgettable. Veterans who flew them 75 years ago still recognize that sound immediately. What Klaus Hartmann understood in June 1944, standing before that disassembled engine, was simple and terrible. Germany had built excellent engines, but excellence in the wrong dimension meant nothing. The Merlin wasn't twice as good as the DB605. It was just better at the altitude that mattered. That was enough. War is often decided by such margins. Not overwhelming superiority everywhere, but critical advantage at the decisive point. The next time you face a technical challenge, remember Rechlin Air Base, June 1944. The question isn't, is my solution simple? Or is my solution elegant? The question is, does my solution perform at the point where performance matters most? Klaus Hartmann knew the answer. So did the Americans and British who designed the Merlin. History remembers which answer was correct.